Music does something to us that almost nothing else can. It reaches deep inside of our brain and lights up all the areas that handle movement, memory, emotion, and even language all at once, which is part of the reason why it can mean so much more to us than just sound or entertainment. It really is a whole brain experience. As a lifelong music lover and guitar player, this is something that I can personally attest to, and I am sure it's something that you have noticed in your own life as well. But one thing you might be surprised to hear, however, is that it has measurable healing effects, not just for our mental health, but also for our physical health, especially for people who have suffered a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, which is actually something that I've probably gotten hundreds of comments about over the years on this channel. And after hearing so many of your testimonies about how strongly music has aided in your recovery, I decided to look a little deeper into the research, and I was literally astounded by what I read. So in today's video, I want to go ahead and share these findings and talk about how and why both just listening to music and also playing a musical instrument can actually help the brain heal from these injuries. Not just by lifting our mood, which can be incredibly helpful to begin with, but also by actually rebuilding neural connections and improving memory and attention, and even potentially aiding in restoring movement and speech in some cases. So to do that, we'll look at what the research says and then talk about how these effects happen in the brain, and maybe most importantly, also why music can sometimes reach us in ways that traditional therapies cannot. Not only functionally, but also in terms of reconnecting with our true identity and the things that we personally find meaningful. Because let's face it, after we suffer a stroke or a TBI, we often experience what can feel like a loss of self. Maybe we can no longer do all the things that we used to, or we forget things, or we struggle with our speech. These can be really hard things to come to terms with. But what's so great about music is that on top of being able to aid in our actual recovery, it can also preserve a bridge to our identity and memories and even our emotional self. It can allow us to rediscover things that bring us joy, even when so many other things in our life have changed. And that really is just one of the many benefits in the long list I discovered when reviewing this research. Now, to be clear, I am not a medical doctor. My field is psychology, and I am in no way suggesting that you should abandon the treatment plan given to you by medical professionals. You should definitely keep up with that. However, after hearing the findings of this research, I would be surprised if you weren't inspired to start including some kind of music as therapy to help support your recovery, because the research is pretty compelling. As always, I will link all of these citations for the studies that I used to make this video down in the description box in case you want to read them for yourself, as they are incredibly informative. But I also want to add that even though this channel mainly focuses on rock and metal music, because that's my personal preference and the visuals definitely reflect that, whatever music you most relate to and enjoy listening to is going to give you the same benefits. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in, and I want to start with the recovery effects that we can gain just by listening to music. Now, I know you might be wondering how something seemingly so passive could really be helpful, but it has surprisingly strong benefits, especially early in recovery, when more active participation may be extremely difficult or even impossible. So let's talk about exactly why and how this can help. Now, when someone suffers a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, the areas of the brain responsible for attention, memory, mood, and language often take a major hit. What's really fascinating, though, is that the research shows that active music listening, especially when it's music that we really like and feel very connected to, can actually start to repair these functions over time. In fact, one randomized controlled trial from 2008 found that stroke patients who listened to their favorite music every day showed increased connectivity in the brain's language networks. And amazingly, that connectivity was directly linked to better verbal memory. Another study found measurable structural changes in the brain's white matter, meaning the very wiring that connects different brain regions, just from listening to music on a regular basis after a stroke. This finding is huge because it shows that music listening isn't just emotionally comforting, it's also biologically active. In fact, a 2021 meta-analysis showed that this type of engagement doesn't just improve memory and attention, it really does support cognitive function overall. I also want to quickly mention here something that I found interesting and important from a 2014 study that suggested that the more emotionally connected we are to the music that we're listening to, the more it directly correlates to improved cognitive performance, because that emotional engagement actually drives neuroplasticity, helping the brain form and strengthen new neural pathways. In other words, what matters most is not what we're listening to, but how deeply we connect with it. And not surprisingly, a 2013 study found that patients with brain injuries who did listen to their favorite music on a regular basis showed higher motivation to participate in therapy and showed fewer depressive symptoms, which correlated with both functional and psychological recovery. So why is this so effective? What is actually happening here? Well, it turns out that listening to music actually supports recovery in several different ways. For one, it provides cognitive stimulation by activating memory and attention networks. This wakes up the regions of the brain that might otherwise stay quiet after injury. At the same time, it helps regulate emotion and mood by triggering the release of dopamine and activating the brain's reward system. As we already talked about, this can reduce anxiety and depression, which are common challenges that can often slow cognitive restoration. Listening also promotes neuroplasticity and encourages our brain to reroute and strengthen connections, even when there's no physical activity involved. In addition, it aids in sensory and attention retraining because structured auditory input helps the brain relearn how to focus when auditory processing or attentional control have been disrupted. So because of all of these amazing effects, listening to music really can be incredibly valuable, especially when physical movement or speech is still limited. It's accessible, it's low effort, but it really does still engage the brain in deep, meaningful ways. But now I want to shift to the benefits that can come from actually playing a musical instrument, because while music listening can do incredible things for recovery, research shows that actively making music can take those benefits even further. This is because playing an instrument is one of the most complex and engaging tasks that our brain can perform. It requires the coordination of multiple systems all at once: motor control, auditory processing, visual tracking, memory, executive functioning, and even emotion. And it forces them to work together in real time. Now, learning to play an instrument, if we don't already know, is something that we can certainly do on our own or with a teacher. But one of the most well-documented programs using this approach is something called music-supported therapy, or MST. This is something that you may want to investigate a little bit further because it's becoming an increasingly recognized rehabilitation tool for people who are recovering from strokes or TBIs. How it works is that it uses musical instruments and rhythmic or melodic exercises to retrain motor skills, improve coordination, and restore cognitive functions by stimulating the brain regions that are involved in these functions. Research has shown that it can help with everything from hand coordination and dexterity to enhanced language recovery. In a 2007 study that used this therapy, researchers found that stroke patients who practiced even simple melodies on keyboards or played the drums for just a few weeks showed significant improvements in arm, hand, and finger movement compared to those who received only traditional therapy. Another study from 2010 showed that MST not only improved movement, but also increased activation and connectivity in motor and auditory regions. This suggests that the therapy was literally helping the brain to rewire itself. There's also growing evidence that in patients who are struggling with speech or language after these injuries, that music can help bypass damaged areas of the brain and allow them to communicate in a different way. In fact, therapies like Melodic Intonation Therapy, which uses musical phrasing to help rebuild speech, have shown measurable changes in right hemisphere language networks and improved verbal output in people with aphasia after stroke. But again, even outside of formal musical therapy, just playing an instrument alone has been linked to significant improvements overall because it engages both sensory input, what we hear, and motor output, what we play, at the same time. This dual activation is literally the perfect combination to enhance neuroplasticity and cognition. But on top of all of that, it just gives people a tangible sense of progress and creativity and hope, which can be incredibly important when we are recovering from something that's been this life-altering. Studies show that survivors who pick up playing an instrument often report feeling more confident and engaged, and that they're much more likely to continue with rehabilitation when music is somehow involved, which I can completely understand. And what I think is so great about all of this is that you don't even have to be remotely good at it. The research shows that even playing simple exercises or melodies or basic rhythms can make a measurable difference. I think in general, a lot of people feel like as we get older that it's too late to start playing an instrument, and that could not be further from the truth. And seeing as how the benefits are this incredible, if you are physically able to do so, it is definitely something to consider. But again, if that's not possible, just actively listening to music really can be life-changing, because whenever we engage deeply with music in any way, our auditory, motor, emotional, and cognitive networks are all going to fire together, communicate across hemispheres, and strengthen the very connections that these injuries often disrupt. This is something that the research is very clear about. And the beautiful part of all of this is that music also activates our reward networks, which makes the brain want to keep going. This is something that no medication or exercise can truly replicate, because it makes the recovery process feel meaningful and not just mechanical. And while music therapy does not replace traditional rehab, it might just be the missing link that helps your brain rebuild and reclaim itself. So as always, I truly hope you found today's video to be helpful and informative, and I want to thank all of you who have shared your stories in the comments on past videos and hopefully on this one. I have been so inspired by everything that you have written, and I know that other people have as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next video.